In Dante's book that became a classic and has been read by millions of people, the book that's called Inferno, at one time this was required reading for most college students. Dante's Inferno. Dante, and this was written hundreds of years ago, but Dante is taking a tour of the underworld and all the horrors and terrors he sees in the underworld. And he reaches the gates of hell. And there he sees inscribed on the gates of hell these terrifying words: "Abandon hope, all who enter here." And we are in a culture, we're in a place in history where others have been, of course, too, where people are desperately looking for hope. Well, it's my prayer this morning that whatever's going on in your life, before the week's over, you will know that it's not hopeless. There is hope. A message of hope. Jesus tells us through his word that the answer, of course, comes through love. That there is no fear in love. That perfect love casts out fear. And when there's perfect love and fear is gone, and you have the gift of hope. Some years ago, there was a banquet that took place in Brooklyn, New York. It was at the Kirsch School. The Kirsch School is a unique school. It was established primarily for children who had some learning disabilities. And at this fundraising banquet, one of the fathers, one of the pupils, was going to give an address. The people assumed it would, of course, be uplifting, inspirational address about their school. But when the father got up there to speak, this is what he said. He said, "Where is God's perfection to be found in my son Shea? Shea cannot learn as other children do. There's no way he can understand facts and figures and concepts. So where is God's perfection here? Is God's perfection missing from my son?" This is not what the people had expected to hear. They thought they were going to get an uplifting message of hope and the like, but that's not what they were hearing so far. And they were very uncomfortable as he went on to make his presentation. Then he shifted gears. He says, where is God's perfection to be found? It's to be found in how people react to my son Shea. Then he told this marvelous story. He and Shea were walking through a park on a Saturday morning, and they saw in the distance there's some boys that had organized a baseball game, and they're playing ball, and Shea looks up at his dad and he says, "I'd like to play ball too." Well, he was so uncoordinated, diminutive little guy. There wasn't an athletic bone in his body. He couldn't play ball. "Daddy, I'd like to." His father thought, no, this isn't going to work. There'll be one more time of rejection. He'll be shunted aside. And, "Daddy, please." Okay. They walked over to where these boys were playing their game, and Shea's father walked up to someone who appeared to be the captain of the team, about a 12-year-old who seemed to be running the show, and he said, "Is there any place for my son Shea on your team?" The 12-year-old looked over at that poor little creature and he said, "Sure, he can play on my team." What? Ooh, that was a surprise. Okay. Father got over the first hurdle, and Shea was feeling so good about this. He got to sit with the other boys on the bench there, and the innings went on. Of course, he never got to play, but he got to sit with them. He was satisfied with that. But now they reached the final inning of the game. The score's tied. The captain comes over and he says, "Shea, your turn to bat." "My turn to bat?" Poor little Shea. He didn't even know which end of the bat he should be holding. But it was his turn. The other boys looked at the captain like, "What are you doing? We want to win this game." But then Shea came up to bat, and the pitcher looked down at Shea and he, Finally, he had compassion on him. Pitcher walked down from the mound, walked about halfway toward the home plate. Very gently took the ball, tossed it like this. Shea took a mighty swing and he missed it by a country mile. He wasn't going to hit any ball. Now this sensitive, young 12-year-old captain came behind Shea. He put his arms around him so that his hands covered Shea's hands. And Shea is now holding the bat. He said, pitch another pitch. Here comes the pitch. Now together they're swinging the bat. They just barely hit the ball. It's like a little dribble that goes out toward the pitcher. But then something crazy happened. Pitcher couldn't seem to find the ball. He's looking all over. And Shea's father says, run to first, run to first. Boy, as fast as his little legs would go, he takes off running to first. Now the pitcher finally picks up the ball. What does he do with it? He throws it way over the first baseman's head. It's way out there in the outfield. Now Shea, run to second, run to second, run to second. And now the outfielder picks up the ball. He's kind of got an idea what's going on now. Okay. So he throws the ball in, but he throws it way over the second baseman's head. Shea, run to third, run to third. Now Shea is going as fast as he can toward third. Third baseman picks up the ball. And no, he doesn't. He couldn't somehow, it kept falling out of his hand. And now Shea, run home, Shea, run home, run home. And Shea is heading for home as fast as he can. Now the third baseman finally picks up the ball, but somehow he throws it way wide of the catcher. Shea hits the plate, home plate, his team wins. Everybody starts cheering. His teammates run out, they pick him up, they hold him up in the air, and they're marching him around the field. And Shea's father said, never in my life has my son been more happy and excited than that moment. And then he paused and the tears started flowing. He said, there I saw God's perfection. God's perfection found in these kids, their reaction to my son. God's perfection. These kids, following the example of the captain of their team, were doing something very Jesus-like. That's what Jesus would have done in those circumstances. We can almost guarantee that. That's what these boys were doing. They were acting like Jesus. Of course, they had the example of their captain, the influence maker, who started acting like Jesus. And that spread until all the rest of them did too. There is no fear in love, Jesus tells us through the scriptures, because perfect love casts out fear. There's another uplifting story that a little different, but it still has the same basic message about what perfect love can do. This was told by someone whose name was Ken. Ken's a married man with young children, good home. He and his wife and children are taking a little vacation. They're going up to Disneyland, place that I guess all of us have been one time or another. And he was talking to his children. He says, well, where are we going to go? They were listing all the things they wanted to do. There's just so much you can hardly get done in one day. Well, one thing they wanted to do, especially his daughter, she said she wanted to be a visitor in Cinderella's castle. Sure. As a matter of fact, we'll do that right off the beginning. That's where we will start, Cinderella's castle. So he and his wife and his son and his daughter, they go up to Cinderella's castle, and of course it's just full of kids all over the place. And they're admiring the different things they saw up there. And then Ken said, it was like there was a wave that hit us. All of a sudden, all the children started running toward one side. Had we been in a ship, we would have tipped over. He thought, what is going on here? And his eyes followed the children. Oh, of course, what was going on here was Cinderella had just come in the door. He said, what a perfect Cinderella. This was great typecasting. Every little hair was perfectly placed, beautiful complexion she had, radiant smile, the perfect Cinderella. Oh, the children were just excited beyond measure. They're all running towards Cinderella. They want to touch Cinderella. Or maybe Cinderella would touch them. And that included his own kids. His own kids were in there too. They wanted to get to Cinderella. They were hoping they could touch Cinderella, or maybe Cinderella would touch them. And then he said he kind of looked away from this mass of people, and he saw on the other side of the room, there was a child. But he said, I couldn't even guess his age, maybe 5, maybe 10. I couldn't guess his age because his body was so badly deformed. And his growth had been stunted, and his face was all out of proportion to the rest of his body. And there he's standing. He's holding the hand of an older boy, assumed this must be his big brother. And he's looking across the room at what everybody else is doing. And Ken said, I looked at that child, and I thought, he wants what everybody else wants. He wants to be over there near Cinderella. He wants to call out her name. He's hoping she might touch him, or he could touch her, but he's afraid to go across the room. Life experiences have shown him that he scares people, that he's not like others. Best to just stay where he was. And Ken said, I just uttered a short prayer at that time. I said, Lord, open Cinderella's eyes so she sees that child. And she did. She did. Her eyes were open. She saw that little boy over there. And she started making her way through all these children, a garden all around her of children. She's slowly making her way through these children. Then she breaks free. Across the room she goes. She walks right up to him. She gets down on her knees. She reaches out and takes his hands, and she kisses him. Ken said, I've never witnessed a more powerful scene that was happening at that moment. She was acting like Jesus. Again, Jesus sets the example for us. We're able to love, we're able to do things like this because Jesus has done it and given us the power to do it. We're able to love, Scripture say, because we have been loved. And now we pass it on. Perfect love casts out fear. I have a friend who has I'm not sure how old he is, probably somewhere in his 20s, but he's got his big full beard and has his long hair. He looks kind of a rough guy, but he always has a big smile on his face, and that's just who he is. It's part of his personality. He was traveling to Minneapolis. He was at the airport waiting for his call or his flight to leave, and in the meantime he's doing something that many of us do when we're passing some idle time, people watching. Just watching people come by, and all kinds of people, all different walks of life, the old, the young, and the black and the white, and they're all mixed together, everybody going someplace. And he's just watching, and he looks out. Here's a lady who's hurrying to the plane, and she's a young mother. She's got a backpack on her back. She's carrying a baby in her arms, and behind her is someone who's maybe 3 or 4 years old, trying to carry this box and keep up with his mom. And this little fellow trips. Box opens up. It was a box of Legos. You can imagine. They're everywhere. All these people, big crowd, mother's in a big hurry to get to the plane. And she turned around and she saw what happened. And he said she almost burst into tears. She just was so exasperated. So he said, I just did what seemed like the right thing to do. I just jumped up and went over there and got on my hands and knees and scooped up all those Legos and put them in that box, handed them back to that little fellow. It's all done in 2 minutes. And then he said something, the little fellow said to this man, he said something that I'll never forget as long as I live. He looked at me and he said, Mister, are you Jesus? Wow. He said, what a day that was. A day in which something he had done caused someone to mistake him for Jesus. I thought, I love that story when he was telling me that story. Wouldn't that be wonderful this week if some of our actions are such that maybe we're not mistaken for Jesus, but at least people see Jesus in us. They say, that's something like what Jesus would do, what he or she did. The opportunities are always there if we just open our eyes to do something like Jesus would have done. And then there's this final thought this morning. And some of you know the name Charles Spurgeon. Over 100 years ago, he was one of the great evangelists of our time, and he had written some wonderful books that are still read by people and benefiting from it today. In one of his books, he coined a little phrase that became so popular. He said this, you know, when you have to make decisions and you're trying to figure out, oh, should I do this, should I do that, what's right, ask yourself this question: what would Jesus do? And then, as you arrive at an answer, that's what you do. And if you're not sure, it might be because you need to get back in the scriptures and get to really know Jesus a little better, and then be able to comprehend, well, this is probably what Jesus would do. Also, mature Christian friends can be very helpful in helping us understand, what would Jesus do? That's a wonderful message. Our own grandchildren have these little bracelets, and maybe some of you do too. WWJD, what would Jesus do? Some people think that's kind of corny, but it goes back for over 100 years, and it's still such a wonderful, wonderful idea to place in our head. Because every day we're making decisions. We can't live a life without making decisions. But sometimes we need to ask ourselves, so what difference does it make? A little guideline that I found very, very helpful when I'm trying to make decisions is to ask myself this: in the light of eternity, what difference does it make? And when we use that perspective, we see in the light of eternity, what difference does it make? It's almost always on the side of relationships. Act where relationships are needed. That's where differences are made. Relationships, our relationship to our Lord, our relationship to each other. What's more important? Everything else falls back in second place. What would Jesus do? Well, he would make sure that everything is going to be right with our Father, and it's going to be best we can make it with one another. Perfect love, Jesus said, casts out fear. And may it be so for all of us this week. And may it be our goal that people are going to see something we've done this week. They're going to see Jesus in that. Amen.